Welcome back to Sick Sad Lit. I'm your host, Jen Eastwood, and today we're diving into the strange, the speculative, and the sublimely unsettling world of one of the most exciting voices in contemporary fiction, Bora Chung, whose latest work, Midnight Timetable, has just been released. If you've read Cursed Bunny or Your Utopia, you already know that Bora's writing lives somewhere between the grotesque and the sublime, a mix of horror, fable, and absurdism that makes the everyday feel both uncanny and profound. But Midnight Timetable took that to a whole new level for me. I've recently finished reading it, and I honestly had to force myself to slow down as I was reading it because I just loved it so much. I was devouring it, and it was truly one of the most engaging and beautifully strange ghost story collections that I've ever read. And if you're listening to this episode in October as it releases, it's the perfect read for spooky season. Bora Chung is a writer, translator, and former university lecturer who has carved out a space in the literary landscape unlike anybody else. With a PhD in Slavic literature and a background teaching Russian language and science fiction at Yonsei University, her stories fuse horror, folklore, and satire with a distinctly philosophical edge. Chung's breakout English language collection, Cursed Bunny, translated by Anton Hur, was shortlisted for the 2022 International Booker Prize and went on to be longlisted for the National Book Award for Translated Literature. The book's 10 stories blur the boundaries between horror and the absurd, between humour and heartbreak, and introduced global readers to her singular style. Since then, she's released Your Utopia and Grocery List, and now Midnight Timetable. In this conversation, we talk about everything from haunted objects and bureaucratic horror to revenge, humour, and human frailty. Bora shares how her academic background in Russian and Polish literature shaped her voice, and how her students inspired her science fictional worlds, and why she believes that fantasy and horror are the truest ways to tell stories about trauma and survival. This episode is a reminder that horror isn't just about fear, it's about the power of the imagination, empathy, and resistance. So, get comfortable and join me for this fascinating conversation with Bora Chung. Bora, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so thrilled to have you on the podcast. I'm a huge fan of your work, and I know many of our listeners are as well. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you. For those who might be new to you, would you mind just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your work?
So, hi, my name is Bora Chung. I'm from South Korea. I write horror stories mostly in Korean. And I wrote, among my works, Cursed Bunny, Your Utopia are both short story collections. They were translated into English and published by Scribe in Australia. And now my other work, which is more like a novel, Midnight Timetable, is coming out this September.
We're so excited. So excited to have new work coming out from you. What is something you've read, watched, or listened to lately that has really stayed with you?
I love Japanese horror stories. Yesterday, I read this short story collection. The title is The Move. So it's about moving to a new space. And it had 6 short stories about moving one's home, moving an office. So all kinds of moving, business, personal. And I really love the idea because moving is such a stressful event.
Hate moving. It is like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I know.
I'd be interested to read that. I love short stories so much, and I'm always interested in short stories that center around like a very human experience, even if it's quite normal. So that sounds really interesting. So in 2022, you were shortlisted for the International Booker Prize for Cursed Bunny. Huge congratulations. How did that moment change things for you, creatively or personally?
Personally, my life kind of took a 180. I used to be a university lecturer before that, and I actually quit my job because my husband got sick. So, I quit my job at the end of 2021 before all the Booker thing happened, and I was planning to go back to teaching, but now I kind of can't. I have a lot to write. So, yeah, that was unexpected.
Do you miss teaching?
I do miss teaching and I miss the structure. I miss my students. I really, really miss my students, but I do enjoy not having to grade. That's a huge plus. So there are pluses and minuses.
So I want us to talk first about Cursed Bunny. Can you take us back to the Asian Zodiac anthology and the cute turned terrifying origins of Cursed Bunny?
So, I belong to a writing group. They call themselves The Mirror because it's a quote from some philosopher that says imagination or fantasy is the mirror of reality or something like that. And we publish in an anthology or we gather our short stories and publish in the summer. So it's from summer to summer, like June to June or something like that. So New Year's fall right in the middle. So around the end of the year, beginning of the year, we have like a discussion of what is coming and how many stories do we have, those kind of things. So we were trying to decide the theme, the topic, or the title of the whole anthology for the coming year. This was at the end of 2015, so it was a long time ago. And somebody said Asian Zodiac, and then everybody tried to grab the glamorous animals. Everybody liked the idea of the Asian Zodiac, and then they realized there are only 12 animals you can grab from. And everything went on. This whole discussion was going on online, and we were doing this non-contact thing before it was a thing. So I had to log in to the website and actually read the board, and I was slow. So when I logged on very late, everything was taken. All the animals were taken, and there were only the bunny and the sheep left. And I know nothing about sheep, but I have this very vague memory of having bunnies in my elementary school zoo. We had a very small zoo, and we had 2 bunnies, and they were very cute, and they were nibbling something all the time. So I decided on the bunny, but they're really cute and they are very fragile animals. They don't have sharp teeth. They don't have claws. They're nibbling something all the time and they get sick or injured very easily and they die very easily. So I decided to make my bunny strong and scary because this is horror and fiction. So I decided to go as far away from reality as possible. That's what I usually do with all my stories. I try to go the opposite direction from any logical event or the opposite direction from reality. And that's how my scary bunnies came to life. But I like the nibbling part, nibbling all the time and being very
That's very
scary about
cute.
it.
Well, yeah, except for the scary part. It's funny that you say you don't know anything about sheep too, because I'm not sure how much you know about New Zealand where I live.
Yeah, I know.
But we have a lot of sheep.
Yes,
It's kind of
you
like
do.
something we're known for. And
Uh-huh.
there are quite a few satirical horror movies, New Zealand horror movies, about rogue sheep. It's kind of like a running joke. So I think I could have had quite a lot of fun with the idea of working with the sheep. What happened to the sheep? Do you know? What did the person do who got the sheep do with the sheep?
I believe nobody got the sheep because
Aw.
sheep aren't very familiar animals in Korea unless you live in a certain region. But when Cursed Bunny became a big success unexpectedly, when I told this Asian Zodiac stories to my readers, a lot of people recommended that I write Cursed Sheep too. So you have Cursed Sheep, Midnight Timetable. We have Cursed Sheep, and there's a chapter entitled Cursed Sheep.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you about that. We'll talk about the Midnight Timetable later on, but when I was preparing for this interview and I was reading about your upcoming book, and the cover from Scribe in Australia has a sheep on it.
Yes.
So having read about the origins of Cursed Bunny coming from getting left with just 2 animals and choosing it over the sheep, I was curious about the going in the direction of the sheep. So I'm pleased. It feels like closing that loop almost. So within the collection, you've said that the unifying theme ended up being about revenge of sorts. How did that emerge for you without it being planned?
I had a bunch of short stories. I used to write one short story per month, and that went on for 7, 8 years. So I had quite a lot of stack of short stories. So I sent them all to my publisher and told them to just go ahead and choose whatever you want. And they chose 10 short stories, and then they came up with the idea that the overarching topic is revenge. So that kind of tells something about me as a person.
I love it. How did you feel about the selection that they landed on?
I liked it. I liked their selection. Yeah. And I had the stacks and stacks of short stories, other short stories that didn't make the collection. So I thought some stories I liked didn't make the Curse Bunny collection, but I had other stories too. So someday I'll just write more revenge stories and publish some more collections. That's what I thought.
Love it. I just love revenge stories. Mainly because in real life you don't get to have revenge, so it's nice to read about when you do. It's like living vicariously through the fiction. You use single sentence paragraphs throughout for like almost a mic drop effect. How did that style develop for you?
I never learned how to write fiction. I published in Korea first as a translator, not as a writer. So, I guess those two elements combined, I never learned how to structure an elaborate sentence, even in my own language. And I just liked the effect of like dry, to the point, fast-paced kind of like sprinting through the story. Also, before Curse Bunny, I spent a year in Poland learning Polish, and it's a hell of a language. The grammar is as complicated as one can imagine. So I became very cautious during class not to use structures that I'm not sure about. And I ended up with very short sentences because that's all I knew. And I kind of got used to it, I guess. And that bled over to my Korean writing in my own language.
That's really interesting. It kind of segues into a question I was going to ask you later on, but I'm just going to ask you now because I wanted to talk about your interest in Polish and Russian literature and how that has influenced your work. But just to jump ahead quickly to that, where did your interest in Polish and Russian language originate from?
It started with Russian. It all came from the Cold War. I was a child during the Cold War, and we still have North Korea above our head in South Korea. So everything, even remotely related to any kind of communist ideology, communist history of communism, anything Marx or Engels said 100 years ago, they were all very strictly banned. And then after December 1991, when the Soviet Union fell, the ban lifted suddenly. It was the scariest thing for any Korean for 50 years. And then suddenly the ban was gone and you could travel to Russia. You could travel to Poland. You could go see whatever you want to see and you could learn Russian. So during the 90s, there was this boom for Koreans to go travel in Russia, ride the Siberian Railroad, learn Russian. All the universities started to open Russian courses or even open Russian department. Everybody got excited, and I think I rode the last wave of that Russian boom. And I was personally interested in the alphabet. I just wanted to be able to read those really weird alphabets.
It's incredible to me. What drew you to commit to not just reading and learning the language at a fairly basic level, but earning advanced degrees in Slavic literature?
Why did I do this? That is what I'm asking myself. Why did I get myself into this mess? Well, like I said, there was this very strict ban. There is still a national security law in Korea. So anything that was related to the communist or socialist ideology was strictly banned. And that meant that any kind of literature, Russian literature or East European literature after Tolstoy died in 1912, it was all banned. So I found this treasure trove of unknown to us, to Koreans, Soviet writers who wrote these fantastic stories or really heart-wringing stories after the revolution about where the country is going, what the future will bring, because they literally, with their own hands, dismantled an empire and built a new country. And that is a very unique experience that happened just once during that time in history, and that is not going to repeat itself, and I hope it does not repeat itself ever. But it was a very unique moment in history, and I discovered these stories written by people who went through it, and these range from the horrific, the bloodbath, to the hopes and dreams of for a better future, new human beings, and a totally different way of life. And it was drama in and of itself, and I was fascinated.
You sort of answered this question earlier, but how has your experience in Polish and Russian language and literature influenced your own work?
Polish and Russian grammar totally screwed up my brain. So um I write very strange Korean sentences, and my editors hate it. I fight with them a lot, and my excuse for all my trouble is that, well, Poles do it, why can't I do it? Well, Russians do it, why can't I do it? And my editors are like, but Koreans do not do it this way. Well, yeah. So
Korean does.
if Hangang doesn't do it that way, then maybe I'm doing it wrong. But I still like my Polish and Russian writers, so I don't know. Yeah, that partly comes from the fact that I was never trained to write fiction in Korean, so I don't know how real Korean writers do. But I learned all the stylistic elements. I learned how to structure a story. I learned how to develop a plot. Everything by reading Polish and Russian literature and by translating them. That's how I'm gonna do it.
It honestly breaks my brain to imagine being fluent in Polish, Russian, and also being a Korean speaker and also speaking English. You're such a polyglot.
I'm not fluent in Russian. I'm not. My Russian is more like reading and translating
It's
language.
still amazing to be able to translate is quite incredible. I think it's amazing. Yeah, don't undersell yourself. And it's one of the things I find the most interesting about you as well, like how that influences your work.
Maybe that's why I write horror, because Slavic grammar is horror.
It's horrifying.
It is.
You've said when in doubt, you go against logic or common sense in your storytelling. So how did that principle shape Cursed Bunny?
It started with the head. That was the first ever fiction I wrote, and it was for a school contest. So I had this idea of a head coming out of the toilet, and the narrator slash central figure would be a woman my age. I was 22 at the time, so a young woman in her 20s. I started writing the first page in a very realistic style. I mean, the whole idea is not realistic, but the woman in my first draft got freaked out. She was screaming and she runs out of the toilet. She tries to get help. And I wrote a whole page. I showed it to my sister and she said, "This is boring." And I realized that is why I was stuck after the first page, because I got bored with my own story. So I scrapped it. I left the first paragraph where the head comes out of the toilet, but then I went to the opposite direction. So in my newer draft, the woman didn't get freaked out at all. She just calmly flushes and gets out of the toilet. And then the story almost wrote itself. So that's when I had this big revelation that I have to go opposite whatever I think is real.
I loved that story, and I love that it's the first story in the collection as well, because it's such a strong start, if you will. Like reading that was such an interesting opening to the rest of the collection in terms of setting it up for what kinds of
That was
stories.
the order of stories was actually Anton's idea.
Really?
Yes,
Wow.
the Korean order is different. Well, the Korean order is more conservative, if you will. It starts with the title story, Cursed Bunny, and the head is the second or the third. But Anton thought English readers like to see what they are getting into on the first page. So we can't start with Cursed Bunny. We have to start with the weirdest stories. And the editors like the idea, so that's how they decided on the order.
How cool. When I shared on my book account that I was going to start reading Cursed Bunny, so many people messaged me with like some version of just you wait, like that first story, it's a strong start.
Yeah, I'm
And
sorry.
so I was
I'm so sorry.
No, I loved it. I loved it. It's exactly my kind of strange and unusual. I thought it was so unique and I'd never read anything like it. And so it was very memorable. Your stories often sit at the intersection of horror, folklore, and satire. Do you see horror as a political genre?
When I started writing fiction, I didn't have a clear idea of I'm going to be political or, well, I'm going to write a satire, but I didn't have those ideas. I just had this very clear, vivid scene that will eventually be the ending. I tried to find the most fitting beginning for that ending, and then I sprint from the beginning to the ending. Like I decide the ending, I go back to the beginning, and then I just run as fast as I can through the story. So I didn't have any idea. But later, with the embodiment, I had some kind of idea because I was at that age when finding a partner and potentially raising a family was a big deal. It was something I was pressured to do, and I had to decide, make a lot of decisions, a lot of big life decisions, or I thought I had to. And I realized that it's very personal, but at the same time, so many socio-economical and political meanings are attached to my own personal decisions about whether to get married or not, whether to have children or not, whether to set up a traditional family or not. Those things were just, it was such a huge pressure. And I tried to navigate the meaning, all of the different meanings and the nuances and the potential pitfalls that await mostly women and that do not seem to affect men as gravely as they affect women and children. So the embodiment was intended as a satire or I can't say a morality tale, but it was a kind of a poking. It wasn't fun. Well, parts of it was fun, but I was poking fun at patriarchy and the Korean society of the 90s and early 2000s where I was living in. But other things I just wrote. And the vengeful and angry person that I am, whatever I just wrote came out as a satire, I guess. I don't know.
What was it like seeing Cursed Bunny become the first Korean speculative fiction longlisted for the International Booker?
I didn't believe it when my British publisher contacted me. I thought, well, they're British. Maybe this is the way they joke.
It's so sad.
Well, you have to understand, my husband was still in the hospital and my mother-in-law had an infection in one knee that spread to other parts of her body and she kind of collapsed during the day, and her neighbors contacted my husband who was in the hospital. So my mother-in-law was in one hospital, my husband was in another hospital, and I wasn't very happy at the time. So so I didn't have the headspace to accept any kind of good news. I was if a doctor or a nurse contacted me, I would take it seriously, but everything else I was like, you're joking. And I just forgot about
Can't
it.
deal with this right now. Yeah, I want to talk about your utopia now. So, how did your academic work on utopias and dystopias lead into your stories in your utopia?
Mostly, I ended up just inserting utopia, the words utopia and dystopia here and there randomly in my stories, and that's about the extent of it. But the entire book, Your Utopia, emerged during the 12 years of my teaching. So the first one, Center for Immortality Research, that the whole thing happened 2 months into my teaching. That was in 2010, and my department was having a 20th year anniversary party. So this entire story is about 75% real. I mean, in that order, true events, true story. And only that weird guy in the end is fiction. I wanted to go out with a bang because it started so strangely, but that stalker guy was real. That professor who, no, the director who steals the expensive DVD from another director, that was a professor who stole an expensive box set of books from another professor. And this professor whose book was stolen actually he was infuriated and he wanted to see the CCTV footage. And I was looking at that little red dot. So yeah, 2 months into teaching, my life met the first crisis. That whole thing happened. And the designer is my friend. So she moved the logo 3 millimeters up, 3 millimeters down. She spent the whole night like moving the logo up and down, left and right. And she actually looked at me and asked me, please tell me not everything in your department goes on this way. And that is the moment when I decided to use that line and write that story.
You've called your utopia a science fiction collection, but it's also tinged with horror. How do you balance the two?
It's not me who's balancing it. As I said, I was teaching while I was writing all those stories from Your Utopia. So I found inspiration from real scientific discoveries or inventions that I found for class material during those 12 years when I was teaching, or ideas and facts, scientific facts that my students told me. And I had a lot of engineering students, physics students, chemistry students, a lot of STEM students. So they are usually very excited about their major and they want to tell me like everything they learned, all those interesting facts. And some of them are really, really creepy. Some of them gave me hope for the future. So I try to integrate everything that I learned from my students. It's not that I try to balance anything. It's just something I felt because I don't really understand the science. No matter how hard my students tried, I couldn't really understand the science, but I could feel how this is going to affect an individual if this particular piece of technology became real or this scientific fact became commodity.
Did your students read the collection and did you hear from them after?
One of my students made a presentation about the elevator story. And I don't like it when my students find out that I write science fiction. It's very, very embarrassing. And he read a whole paragraph while he was making that presentation. And it was like public execution in front of my students.
I bet they're so impressed by you. I would be.
Thank you. That's their problem. I was embarrassed.
You've said previously that you initially thought the theme for the collection was interaction, but readers have seen it more as humanness. Do you agree with that?
Well, I appreciate that interpretation. And as I said, because I'm a humanities major, I studied literature. So no matter what my students try to tell me, whatever comes out of my head is focused more on the human side rather than the scientific side.
In your utopia, you balance violence, loss, and end of world scenarios with moments of grace and hope. Where do you find that hope?
There is no hope. If there is any hope in the entire collection, it was my students. I saw hope in them in every class. I really loved them and enjoyed every minute with them.
Has teaching changed the way you imagine the future in your own writing, and teaching science fiction changed the way you imagine the future in your own writing?
Um, I felt the need to believe in a better future because that is the future that my students will live. I personally don't believe in utopia. We're all doomed and we're all screwed. But, when I think that my students and their students, some of my students grew up to be teachers themselves, and I have grand students that I've never met. You know? So, and I this one particular student, I meet him like every single protest. He is my best student, and I wish all the best for him and my grand students. And when I think about him and his colleagues and all the other people my students are affecting in their lives, I have to believe in a better future, and I have to do something to make it real. Otherwise, I'm not doing my part as an adult.
What is your personal view, or how do you feel about the development of AI and how it's becoming more human-like, and how art is increasingly being co-opted by AI?
Um, my students actually told me back in 2013 and 14, so more than a decade ago, my students already told me that software machine learning back then, it was not like generative AI, it was just machine learning. They told me that engineers already developed software that thinks like human beings or reacts to data more humanly than human beings. And the first chatbot that passed the Turing test, so the first chat could trick the human counterpart into thinking that they are chatting with a human being. That happened in 2012. So I already knew and heard like multiple times that AI is surpassing whatever humans could reach. I should have guessed, but I just didn't imagine that AI would start to erode human creativity for profit for the profit of big companies this fast and this so violently and so fast and it makes so much destruction.
Can you please introduce your new book and tell us about it, what to expect? Give us the rundown on your new book.
So the title Midnight Timetable actually comes from a bus terminal in this remote region where I live. I live in Pohang, which is not very small. It's a mid-sized city by the sea. And because it's a port city, we have a lot of international sailors, students, workers. So compared to the size of the bus terminal, it has a lot of announcements in English. The schedule for night buses it didn't say night buses, it said a midnight timetable. So I thought that was very romantic and intriguing, and I wanted to steal that. So somebody's Google Translate became my title, Midnight Timetable. And they still have that sign that says night buses in Korean and midnight timetable underneath it in English. So that was the part of the inspiration. And at first I thought maybe I should like make a timetable and structure my novel in that way. But then I got distracted by all the other ghost stories. I'm not a very well-structured person, so I abandoned the structure very fast. And then I read somewhere from a newspaper article that people who were born blind rarely get schizophrenia because the explanation in that article was that seeing people when they have schizophrenia, it's often because they try to fit reality of what they see. They try to fit the visual images into the reality in their heads. So essentially, they're trying to create and fill in the gaps when they're not seeing something they think they should be seeing. And from that gap between what they're not seeing and what they think they should be seeing comes all the hallucinations. But non-seeing people who were born that way never relied on visual images, so they just don't rely on that kind of hallucination. They just don't hallucinate that way. And I thought, first of all, it made me think about what is disability? What is the meaning of disability? And it made me realize once again how imperfect we are, how fragile and vulnerable we all are. And our non-disabled, very ableist definition of disability could be some kind of a strength to cope with this world for some people. So I decided to make the non-seeing person one of the central characters. So her disability in this case is not a disability because she doesn't see ghosts. No ghost can trick her because she just doesn't see them.
I love that.
Yeah. And then and I needed some other people with their own disabilities or people who are imperfect in other ways to work with her in this strange institution. And I came up with the idea of an institute because I think I was thinking about my university during COVID. Because there was nobody there, even during semester, like during normal semester class time, there was nobody there. And I went there like once or twice to submit some documents or go to the library or something, and it was eerie. And I think it left an imprint in my brain that this is something I want to use as a background in one of my stories.
Book blends fable, ghost story, and social commentary. What makes the haunted object trope such a rich vehicle for those different things?
It's a very common trope in Korean fairy tales and legends. I think generally in Asian horror stories, there are a lot of haunted objects, cursed objects, or sometimes there's a ghost trapped inside and you have to free the ghost and then the object is not haunted anymore. Those kind of stories. I grew up with those kind of stories, so I'm very familiar with that kind of trope. And I actually really read a story about this mother and son who were refugees about 1,000 years ago in Korea when a very small country was taken over by another country and eventually it collapsed and all the people were, they say, absorbed into this new society, but it means that they became refugees and they kind of formed the bottom strata of this invading country. So there was a story about this mother and son who were refugees. The mother had to find a job as a maid at a rich person's house. This rich person being the nobleman of the invading country. And this rich person, the rich guy, of course, tried to sexually exploit the mother. And the son ran away, became a Buddhist monk, but came back later as an adult and sets fire on the house. And it was a really scary story. And I realized that they had refugee problems 1,000 years ago. and you should really not abuse refugees because they're going to come back and set fire in your house.
Bad juju, man.
Yeah.
You've setting yourself up for a family curse.
Yes, that was the lesson of the story. And then the story kind of disappeared. I couldn't find it anywhere else, which befits the entire context of Ghost Institute and haunted objects. I want to find the story again, but it kind of
That's
fits.
amazing.
Yeah, it is. So I twisted the story. So now it's not mother and son, it's mother and daughter. And the object is different. There was no cursed object in the original story. So I made up a cursed object. I used that story, and actually one of my Korean readers wanted to find the story. And this is 17-year-old boy or something like that. So he was like really fascinated with the story, and he really, really wanted to find the original. So I went back to my source book, The Legends of Three Kingdoms, and I went through the entire book and I couldn't find it anywhere. So I apologized.
So bizarre.
It is.
The
No,
fact that
but
it almost
but
appeared to you
I
to
told you
help
I'm
serve
not
the
a very
purpose.
well-structured person. So considering it's me, yeah, it's very common.
Find that hard to I find that hard to reconcile, you not being a well-structured person but also being a teacher and a translator of Slavic literature. Like, to me, those things feel like undertakings that would require you to be a well-structured person. So I'm not sure that I believe you.
I was not a very well-structured teacher. Students like constant every single class my students reminded me to take attendance. They were like, "Boy, you have to take attendance." They would tell me, "I'm here, you have to take attendance." Like, yeah, translation, I was never very well structured. I was a very haphazard person doing all those things. And now that I have lost my structure, at as a school teacher, I am more haphazard.
So what does your process look like from, say, beginning a book or a project like the Midnight Timetable through to completion and publication? What's that like for you?
I actually have so I have a bunch of Chinese characters written in here because I was trying to find a good name for my characters. And I started like having fun writing down Chinese characters, and then I started writing down like random Chinese characters. Yeah, that's what happens. I get distracted and I start doing something else. But I do like writing on paper with my favorite pen, and moving my hand, concentrating on the strokes on that I can see on the paper. That kind of physicality gives me, I guess, a peace of mind, and also I can concentrate better. But it's just really totally random. And then I started studying these heritable epigenetics and differentiated cells, inner cell mass. So I started like collecting the words and phrases that I didn't understand from a biology research paper because just happened to be interested in that particular topic at the moment. So I have a mess. That's what my process looks like. I have a mess, and I have all these stories that are, some of them are stories, some of them are just distractions, and then I have a deadline, and then I start writing.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me. How do you know when a story is a story versus a distraction?
I actually don't. But if it has an ending or some kind of argument in it, then I can investigate and turn it into a story. But if it doesn't have that strong ending, even if it's like a sequence ending or a chapter ending, it doesn't have to be the ending of an entire novel. But if it has that knot that ties up everything from the previous paragraph, sentence, whatever, then I can make it into a story. But if it doesn't, then it's just scribbling on a page.
So the Midnight Timetable is more like a novel, right? So closer to
I hope so.
a novel. How do you find it within you to stay with a longer project? Like, rather than with short stories where they're all different, how do you stay engaged with a single project?
Really bad at it. I like short stories so much better. And some of my fellow writers actually say that a short story and a novel are two different genres. Like, these are two different fields. And there are people who are better at writing short stories, and there are people who are so much better with long forms. I'm definitely better with short stories. And when I have to write a novel, remind myself of the words of wisdom from my PhD dissertation advisor. Um, if you write 10 different research papers on the same topic, then you have a dissertation. Then that is when you have a book. So if a dissertation seems too overwhelming, then break it down into 10 chapters. And these are like 10 papers about this, loosely about the same topic. So when I'm overwhelmed with a novel, I try to approach it from that point of view. And that is exactly what Midnight Timetable looks like.
I cannot wait to read it. I'm so, so excited to read it. How did you weave real world horrors like animal testing, conversion therapy, domestic abuse, late stage capitalism into supernatural allegories?
The animal testing part actually came from my husband. He went to school, and his department building was right in front of the veterinary school. And he told me that when he was a student, he actually saw like sheep roaming the veterinary school yard, and they were grazing. There were university students, and then there were sheep.
Sounds like New Zealand.
That was his university experience. Yeah, like New Zealand. But all these sheep had scars, or there were like lines, IV lines hanging from them, and they had
That's so
bags,
sad.
or because they belong to the veterinary school, and vet students have to practice on something. Horses and cows are too expensive in Korea, and they are of higher demand, so people don't really want to sell or donate their healthy horses or cows to the vet school. So sheep are used in to practice treating larger animals. That is what I found out about vet schools, and it's not exactly animal experimentation. It's vet school, and they have to practice. I do understand, but they do have a moral dilemma. But yeah, that actually came from my husband. And conversion therapy, I didn't want to go into the details of it, so I did not, because I never experienced it myself. It was simply because I just happened to be born a heterosexual cisgender woman. It was just luck. It was dumb luck. And I wanted to focus on people who were broken by society and then blamed for being broken. And sometimes when people are broken in that way, traumatized and broken by prejudice, by discrimination, and then blamed for being broken because they are discriminated against, I think fantasy is the only way to describe their reality, because trauma makes your reality very unstable, and they cannot trust themselves to see and interpret reality like a sane person, because this Chen, this character who went through conversion therapy, which was physical sexual mental violence, he thinks he is broken, and he has been hearing people telling him that you're weird, you're insane, you're broken, you're wrong, your existence is wrong. He's been hearing that all his life, so he doesn't trust himself. And when you don't trust yourself, then how do you deal with reality? You don't. Then everything is fluid. Am I seeing hallucinations? Is this all in my head? Is this real? You can't really tell. And fantasy and ghost stories are the most fitting genre for that kind of story.
The handkerchief, the sneaker, the cat. Can you talk about crafting horror through these deceptively mundane items?
Handkerchief, my maternal grandmother's sister used to be a wonderful, wonderful seamstress, and she used to sew things like embroidery. She was really good at embroidery. And I do remember my grandmother having these very elaborate embroidered objects. Like she had this embroidered bird on her, it was in a frame on her wall. And I don't know where it went after she passed away. I wanted to have it. So the bird comes from there, because it was what my grandmother really cherished. It was from her sister, and her sister made it from scratch by just embroidering, and it was amazing work. So that's where the handkerchief came from. But the story of the mother preferring the second son as opposed to the first son and ignoring all her daughters, that's actually my mother's friend.
Really?
Yeah, my mother's friend was living in the US, and she had to come back to Korea because her mother was gravely ill. And she is one of five daughters, and she also has two older brothers, and the two older brothers have been feuding since they were born, since the second son was born. And that is their whole family drama. No ghosts and no ghost handkerchiefs, but that was real, that part. So yeah, I heard so many family dramas, like gossip from my grandmother and my mother.
Publishers Weekly called the book Bone Dry Wit with a Biting Allegorical Edge. Where do you find humor in the midst of horror?
Humor, I guess, well, the tunnel story, I think the second one in the story with Chan, that was my own experience when I got lost at night, trying to find my way to an event at a bookstore. And I eventually arrived on time, and I told my audience that I got lost, and the only thing I could see was the yellow line in the middle. And they wanted me to write a keepsake for them, something they would recognize as my adventure to that particular event. So that's why I put it in there. And I think that is kind of funny. And I laughed at myself for being a really bad driver, only because I made it there on time and safely, and then I came back safely home. So I was relieved, and then I had the leisure of being able to laugh at myself. But when I was actually lost, I was terrified. So yeah, I guess it just comes from the fact that I'm a very bad driver.
Do you see the Midnight Timetable as in conversation with Cursed Bunny and Your Utopia, or does it mark a departure?
Your Utopia, I'm not sure. Cursed Bunny, definitely, because there's cursed sheep in Midnight Timetable. And that came from a reader comment about Cursed Bunny and cursed sheep. So yes, definitely. And there's
I'm
cursed
so
cat
pleased.
too.
Maybe we'll have a third. Were you tempted to call it Cursed Sheep?
Yes, I was, but Midnight Timetable was such a good title.
It's a great name.
Yeah.
It is such a great name.
And by the way, in Vietnam, the Vietnamese zodiac has cat instead of rabbit. So cat, cursed bunny, cursed sheep, they all fit into the Asian zodiac somehow.
That's so cool. Your fiction often leaves reality quite ambiguous. Why is that space between truth and fiction so fertile for you?
Probably because I'm never sure whether I'm making the best decision in life. I'm never sure about myself and the way I interpret reality. Um, and also as a literature scholar, I think reality becomes much more interesting and fun when there is an element of when there's room for imagination. And that is what romanticism is all about, where horror and romance and all these popular genres became genre. That's during the romantic era, romantic era. And the entire point was there is a larger world, an entire dimension that human beings with our own limited five senses cannot fathom, cannot understand, but only get a glimpse of. That's the whole point of romanticism. And I really like that idea.
Violence against women appears in your work, and yet your characters retain dignity and agency. How do you strike that balance, and how do you approach challenging or difficult themes and topics?
I try not to depict scenes of violence. It often becomes violence porn or rape porn. I don't do that. I'm against it. I'm more interested in the aftermath of how the survival copes with the trauma and how the survivor navigates this broken world. And also, I really like imagining how to kill the perpetrator. And that is the whole point. I like to kill the perpetrator. I want to kill the bad guy.
Yes, that's why it's so satisfying to read when it happens, because I wish that there were more evenly balanced scales of justice in real life. Many protagonists face injustice from systems, political, legal, technological. Do you think speculative fiction is uniquely suited to critique power?
No, but we are reclaiming power. This is something I heard at Hong Kong International Literary Festival. It was during COVID, so everything was online. So I didn't really get to meet the Chinese writer in person, but he is gay and he is teaching Chinese literature and he writes science fiction. Can't remember his name, but he said it's not that science fiction is uniquely fitted to describe reality for minorities. It's just that we have the right to voice our experiences. And I think Samuel Delaney said the same thing. And I read something similar in a research paper about Octavia Butler, that science fiction used to be the new imperialist tool. If you look at science fiction or speculative fiction from the 50s and 60s during the Cold War, all the white people mostly from the US and the Soviet Union hop on a spaceship and they go to an alien planet and they colonize the planet and they call the residents monsters and they kill off all the monsters who are just minding their own business and living their lives in their planet. Ever since education became available for everybody, including women, people of color, the minorities, and ever since writing became an available tool for the minorities, it's been like at least a century ever since education, reading, writing, and publishing became available for everybody. So now we are writing our own stories, and our own stories of the minorities often seem very fantastical or unrealistic to the eyes of those who are in power or those who have hegemony. That's why the genre fits the minorities better, because there are hopping on a spaceship to colonize another planet became old news half a century ago. People who are broken through conversion therapy, or people who know that there are electronic wheelchairs that can climb upstairs but have no money to buy it. That is reality. And that kind of reality gives us a lot richer stories to talk about and a lot more topics to navigate.
I think it's so interesting too that for so long, speculative fiction, science fiction has just been a white male thing for ages, like a cishet male space. And now we're finally starting to see, I mean, of course, there were the outliers like Octavia Butler, but they were outliers rather than a general trend in the genre. And now it's so amazing to see so many more voices coming through in the speculative space. And it's also interesting, like you say, like their stories have so much more depth and breadth than the status quo, what we're used to. Talking about your writing and creative process, we've spoken a little bit about it already. I've read that your earliest memory of reading involved a diagram of a human tongue. Do early images like that shape your writing sensibility? Or given the fact that you grew up with two dentists and the dental clinic was out the back, how did that influence your perception of creativity in the world?
It gave me the wrong idea that I know science well, but in fact, I don't, but I guess it made me more comfortable making up stories that look scientific but are not, because they were like real diagrams of the human body and the human mouth, and they were like real materials from dental school. But I was like 4 years old. I didn't understand anything, so I interpreted those visual materials in my own 4-year old mind, and that's what I'm doing now. There's this advanced science and technology research papers, all the materials, and there's more information now because of the internet, and also because now I'm a grown person, but I still don't understand anything. I just interpret it in my own head and make up stories that look sciencey.
Was there pressure to become a dentist? Did you think you would follow in your parents' footsteps?
Yeah, at some point I thought I wanted to be a dentist, but in high school I realized that I suck at math, and that's
Mm.
that's kind of a problem.
When do you know that an idea is worthy of a story?
I don't. I don't. I feel like every idea is worthy of a story. It just depends on me, mostly my physical strength and stamina to turn them into a story.
You've said that your favorite stories, quote, kill bad people, which we've talked about, and sometimes they eat each other. How do you decide when to lean into that kind of violence in a story?
From the very beginning, I decide on whom to kill, why I need to kill them, and how to kill them. And it's the best part of making the story, imagining how to kill this person.
I love that. I also love that it's not your writing, it's not gratuitous. Like, it doesn't feel just like slasher for the sake of it. Like, it's more refined than that, and you still get the same satisfying payoff, which is excellent. How do you ensure that humor and horror can live in the same story without canceling one another out?
Horror is usually something that is unreal, or the scenes of horror makes the witness or the audience doubt themselves. Like, is this real? Am I actually seeing this? Is this actually happening? That kind of sense of doubt. And once that sense of doubt passes, then you start seeing the absurdity of the whole thing. And I think there's some humor in there, but it depends on what kind of horror it is. Like, if it's a real kind of horror of an accident, for example, then you cannot laugh at the victim. You can never laugh at the victim, but you could laugh because you've lost your mind. That does happen because the horror was too great and your mind could not process it and you just lose it. Or other times, if it's a bureaucratic horror, like my friend, the poor designer moving the logo up 33 millimeters, down 3 millimeters all night, then yeah, you can laugh at the people who are making her do it. And I could laugh at myself, like doing it, making her do it because I was a part of that machine. So yeah, it depends on the situation, but there is always some kind of absurdity in reality.
Do you think about pacing when you're working on a story, especially in short fiction, where if you know the ending and you're working towards the ending, are you conscious of pacing as you're going?
Yes, of course. I am always conscious of pacing. I prefer everything fast. But there are moments when I feel that I need to depict the background, or I depict in Midnight Timetable. I did try my best to depict the haunted objects as clearly as possible. I'm not very good at visual depiction, but I try to depict what it looked like. And when the object is pretty and haunted, it's scarier somehow. So I try to give that contrast. It's pretty, but it's scary. Other times, Anton calls this my word vomit. Other times, I just throw up words that, and I just I just sprint through the event as fast as possible if that is necessary. If I want to confuse the audience, that is.
What does your typical writing day look like at the moment?
My typical writing day, if I am not that close to deadline, then you've seen all the Chinese characters and my distractions. That's what I do, and then I listen to podcasts, and then I lie in bed and I'm totally useless and I'm rolling in bed all day. If I'm close to deadline, then I start writing as soon as I wake up, and then I start and then I write, and then I eat, and I write and I eat. Yeah, I do that for like 3-4 days.
When did you start working on the Midnight Timetable, and how long did it take from idea through to final draft? And what was the process like for that?
I saw the title, The Midnight Timetable, at the bus terminal in 2021, early 2021, like February or March, and I liked it. So I was thinking about the timetable thing, and around that year in the summer, I saw that article about people who are born blind not having schizophrenia, and I really liked it. And then I had the offer. I had the offer from the publisher, the Korean publisher, in 2022. So the writing process itself didn't take much time. It was like 3 months, I think. But I was thinking about that title and the haunted objects and everything from 2021, so about a year.
3 months feels super fast. So I guess because you say you had all the elements were there, was it just a case of just now bringing it to life?
Yeah, fast doesn't mean good.
What's the translation process like when Anton is working on the translation? Are you involved in that, or do you just kind of see what's going to happen at the end?
No, I don't tell him anything, and I don't bother. As a translator, he is so much better than I am as a translator. So, and I know what translation looks like, the nitty-gritty details of it. So I know for a fact that if you bother the translator, it's only going to get worse. So I try not to touch him when he's working. With Utopia, I had some sources and citations wrong. So he told me that he couldn't find the text from this source that I had in the original Korean. So I fixed that. That was it. Midnight Timetable, my editor and Anton had this whole discussion after the translation was done, whether to put the in the Midnight Timetable or just Midnight Timetable. And I'm very bad with articles, so I just stayed away from the whole discussion.
Do you read it? Do you read the translations once they're finished to see how he has interpreted it?
Well, they do send me the galleys because they have to. It's in the contract, and I go through it to find typos. That's it.
Translation in general fascinates me in terms of the same ideas, but how they can be communicated so differently depending on how the translator has interpreted the meaning. How do you feel about the English interpretation of it? Is there anything that gets lost in interpretation, not because of Anton, obviously, just because of the nature of language? Or do you feel it's largely the same as the original Korean?
I feel that because when I'm writing the stories, there are these scenes that are popping. I know where I stumbled. I know where I just made things up to just jump to the next scene. And I know where things don't make sense. I know all the plot holes, but Anton doesn't know that. So he just translates what he understands, and he is a native speaker of Korean. So it feels like he knows what I'm trying to say. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but he knows what I'm trying to say. So I like that. It's not embellishment. He just knows what the story looks. He just knows. And with Midnight Timetable and Utopia, it's not specifically about modern Korea, especially Utopia. It's science fiction, so it could be set anywhere in any time period. So I think it's easier to be set in a different language. because it was never set, like really fixed in one reality. Curse Bunny was a little different, but Your Utopia, I think it was more fluid that way. At Midnight Timetable, I hope so too, because there are scientific or parascientific institutions anywhere in the world, in the modern world. So I think it fits kind of generally in our time, but not in specific society or specific reality.
I'm so looking forward to reading it. I can't wait. It's like my most anticipated release. What do you hope readers take away from Midnight Timetable?
Whatever they would like. It's for fun. Horror or any kind of popular genre is for fun. I wrote it for fun, and I hope my readers read it for fun, and I hope they get a good chill. That's about it.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Bora. It's been so amazing hearing all of the background on your incredible stories and learning more about your process, which is so relatable, and you're so real for being honest about how you work through a new creative idea. So thank you so much. We're so looking forward to the release of the Midnight Timetable. Thanks so much for listening to Six Sad Lit. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leaving a quick review helps other readers and writers find the show. And if you want to keep the conversation going, come hang out with us in the Six Sad Friends Discord book club. Come for the books, stay for the friends. You'll find the link in the show notes below. Until next time, thanks for listening.